Hello, everyone, and happy Memorial Day, and welcome to another episode here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I am your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. And welcome to the last week of interviews here for the month of May on the channel. And to start us off, here is the last author interview for the month of May. Now, my guest is another first timer here on the channel. She is a first time author who is set to release her debut book, The Sacred Vine, as the first of a trilogy series coming this December. She's an avid collector of vintage books and a passionate poet with a deep love for classic literature. She enjoys spending quality time in the countryside with her husband and three daughters. So, without further ado, let's give a big round of applause to a first timer here on the channel, Victoria Sorenson. Victoria, thank you so much for coming on the channel today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So, before we dive into your upcoming book this December, is there anything else you'd like to add about your background?
I am a poet and I recently joined like a poetry group and I am reading at a bookstore for the first time, like live, and I'm super nervous about it, but I'm super excited. And I'm really putting myself out there because I tend to be like, I have a lot of like social anxiety. And
Mm,
so I'm doing what I can to kind of overcome that.
wow. Kudos. You're probably like I want to say the third or fourth guest I've had in this lineup that has talked about upcoming author appearances for first time, and that's incredible. I myself am trying to do that as well. It is not easy. It is a hustle. It is a
Yeah.
grind, but honestly, it's the most incredible experience for any author to read their works to the public. And speaking of works, what can you tell us as a little teaser for your upcoming book this December? What is it about and what should we expect?
Yeah, so my book is called The Sacred Vine, and it's based on two elven twin sisters that bloomed from the vine of life, and they are hunted by creatures that they were taught when they were younger that were like um like from their nightmares, like bedtime stories, like they
Ooh, okay.
horror. And I know, sorry, my brain blew up. So,
You're fine.
so the point of view of the story is actually only from one of the sisters, and that was something I had to kind of consider, like, was I going to do two different points of view, was I going to do one sister and then the other and kind of go back and forth. But ultimately I decided to just stick with one because this, especially this book, because I'm like world building, and that's like one of like that's the reason for this book. It's actually going to be a trilogy, and so this is the
Okay.
first. Yeah, and so this is the first one, and so I thought it would be almost too hectic and too much to be world building and going back and forth between points of view. I thought, and they're twins, I thought the readers might get confused of who's who. You know what I mean? Because
Right.
everything that's going on, especially in the beginning, is so similar, everything they're going through. And so it's also it's just one of those things where, like, I guess I just made that decision, and I know it's really popular right now to have several different points of view, right,
Mm-hmm.
in books right now. And so that was just something I was like, well, I just think, at least for this book, that I should just do one.
Wow, that actually sounds really, really interesting. And probably this is probably the first story that I've had on the channel that actually is about elves and other works of fiction and fantasy, which is amazing because I don't really get a lot of like elvish fantasy stories here on the channel. So that's really, really interesting. So for you, Victoria, growing up, what was sort of your aha moment that you enjoyed writing and telling stories? And then what was sort of like the desire to push you to become an author and a poet?
Okay, so aha moment for me was probably when, so back when I was like elementary school, my family at first, we didn't have a lot of money growing up. And so my mom would always take us to the library because it was free. And so I just really remember enjoying my time in the library and reading books and going, wow, this is, I would like to write a book one day. And it kind of was an escape, from like all the worldly things that were going on. And I was just like,
Right.
I could at least focus on, and enjoy reading books. And that's kind of why I think I also like fantasy, is because, it's kind of an escape from, I guess, reality, which
Right.
is fun.
Honestly, that's very much the same thing for me. Like I enjoyed going to the library. I remember even in school, I would spend most of my time in the library just to, enjoy reading. I would just have a hoard of books right next to me, just reading and reading. And it is an escape from reality because you get a chance to explore new worlds, and the interaction with characters has a huge impact on your mind where you're like, yeah, I want to try this myself. So when you began writing The Sacred Vine, what was your promise you set out that, in the sense, when a reader picks up this book, what do you hope for them to take away from The Sacred Vine and the other two books in the series in the future?
Great. Okay, so I'm going to kind of explain how I wrote it, and then that'll kind of explain your question.
Okay,
So,
no problem.
so the Sacred Vine, I kind of combined several of my interests together. And so psychology, nature, music, and just the arts in general. And I combined it together to kind of create the fantasy world in the Sacred Vine. And there's 5 kingdoms in the
Ooh,
Sacred
all right.
Vine. And I really enjoy learning about other cultures. And so, right? Yeah, it's awesome. And so I've kind of created, so each kingdom has their own culture. And so what I hope readers learn from my story is that it's so complicated. Culture's so complicated. And so
Yes.
yes, and so we are taught things, from growing up. And I'm not talking about just religion. I'm talking about, just like everyday life. And then we kind of come to a realization that a lot of people live different lives and have different experiences. And so that actually, I really challenge that in the book. And I also challenge basically, so the main character, that it's her point of view, it's Saya, her mom, I call moms Mias. So her Mia is teaching her that, even though she was born with, a lot of people like to say, a curse, but it's actually
Mm.
supposed to be a blessing from the vine. So she's gifted powers. She can change the minds of those, even though it's like almost generationally like taught for them to believe a certain way about her. So
Ooh.
yeah, so it's really like, it's like she believes that you can change the thoughts of others through actions. And so that's what I hope my readers, kind of get from my book and understand. And there's a lot of family values in my book, and there's romance too. But it's kind of like,
Nice.
it's like added in, it's not like just romance. There's like a lot of things going on.
That's actually really, really cool. The power to change. At first, you were just gonna say the power to change one's mind. Is like that is a dangerous power in and of itself. But the power to change one's mind through actions. It actually kind of reminds me of a trope that's common in storytelling, which is changing the power to change from enemy to friend through actions. And we see that a lot in like
Right.
shows, children's stories, movies. That's like the ultimate power. Like if you have the power to literally turn the most evil person not only good, but that person is now your ally and best friend, that makes you really, really powerful. And I'm very curious to see how you take that thematic element and apply it to your story. And I'm really intrigued to see how other people uh, take away from it, which then leads into the next question, Victoria. So, When you told your friends and your family that you were writing your debut book, The Sacred Vine, what was the initial reaction like? Was it mixed? Was it positive? Negative?
So it was positive, but I also understand, and this goes for all, I guess, new authors, you know, anyone who wants to try something new. I think that our family and friends really don't want to see us fail. They really,
Right.
and so they're hesitant. And so it might feel like they don't support you at first, but they really they care and they love about you. They love you and they care about you. And so they just I was supported, but everyone's hesitant at first because they're like, I'm not really sure, where it's going to go from here. And then I kind of had to prove myself a bit. You know what I mean? Like, actually, like, I
Right.
finished writing the book. Now it's in the editing process. Like, look at all this, look at everything I'm doing. Look at how hard I'm working. And so that's kind of what you have to do. I think for readers too, is you kind of have to show them like you're working hard and that all the stuff that you're doing is going to be worth it for them to read the book.
Absolutely. And 100% true. Like, that's why everyone I've ever talked to on the show said, when you give out your books to like readers to like really review and give critique, friends and family is also important, but they're going to approach it in the sense that they don't want us to see us, deflated, fail. So it's a different mindset and review from them. But readers who we don't really have a connection with, but we've talked with them saying, here's my work. I would really love you to read it. And they provide us feedback. And then from there, their initial reaction really sets the tone and the precedent going forward. So for you, Victoria, I don't know if you've had beta readers or street readers who have read your story beforehand and provide you initial feedback to improve upon. But if you have, do you feel that those initial reactions and reviews have validated your promise that you told us earlier?
So I have not had anyone read it yet, but I do have beta readers lined up. And so this summer, so they'll be reading my book in about like a month or two. And so
Ah,
I will
okay.
get feedback soon. And the only feedback I've had so far is like from my actual, like maybe my blurb or, from like people helping me edit. And I've had really good feedback. And I think that everyone really likes it and they really like how much I've went into detail of like building like my world and everything.
Ooh. Absolutely. I honestly love the world building aspect of
Me too.
storytelling because you get to pretty much, it's a sandbox. You get to create whoever you want, whatever you want, and there is no limit to the creations you can make. And honestly, it's fun to go all out, but you do have to be mindful. It's like, okay, maybe reel it back. Don't want to confuse the reader too much.
Right.
So it's a nice balance between you want to show your individuality in storytelling, but you don't want to confuse the reader so much that they get lost in the story. And I think that definitely comes to the next question, which I'm sure you'll definitely agree, Victoria, that writing a book is a very lonely process where I've talked a lot about this on the show. You spend hours and hours, if not years, developing just the first draft. And then from the first draft, it's edits, revisions, cuts, completely starting over. And then when we get to that final stage of putting it on the world digital stage platform, we are hesitant to think of, okay, is it going to hit the audience that we want? And 50-50 chance it can go either way, which then ties into the two goals, which we'll talk about later, which is your long-term goals. Did you want to be an author or do you want to be known as an author, which have two different mindsets? But as I said, we'll go into that later. And then that voice of imposter syndrome always in the back talking to you, it really puts a huge strain on anyone in the creative field. So for you, Victoria, when crafting this story, did you ever have those moments of imposter syndrome or moments of doubt? And if not, what has disciplined you to continue writing this story because you know that this is something that you want to do? You want to be a writer, to be an author.
Right. So, gosh, this is not my first book, but this is the first one that I felt that I feel really confident in, that, you know what, this is, you get that feeling of this is the one. Like, this is
Right.
the story. This is probably my sixth book. And that is actually going past the first draft, that I'm like,
Wow. Okay.
so that I am like, you know what, this is good enough. I would write a book. I would write a story, and I've tried just romance. I've tried, what's another one, like science fiction, that kind of thing, and it was almost there. There was an idea that was really good, but I was like, this just, you know what I mean? I just wasn't really feeling it.
Right.
So I was like, you know what? Let me just try fantasy, because I felt like I was like leaning towards that anyway, but just how people will, I feel like, will judge you based off of, oh, she's writing fantasy, you know.
I get what you're saying.
'Cause I'm not around a lot of people who, like, and friends and family who necessarily read fantasy. And so I feel like there is a stigma behind it. And so I was hesitant to fully dive into it. And then I kind of had an idea, just a concept, in my head. And I was like, you know what? I think I want to go with it. And it had to do with the vine. And I was like, what can I do with this? And so I first just completely world built. Like, that's it. Like, I didn't come up with my characters first. I created the world first. And then as I was creating the world, the characters kind of came out to me. Like, were coming to me, like the ideas, and I was able to build my entire story through world building, actually. And like, from this point to this point to this point, and it actually really came together nicely.
Nice. You're probably like the second author I've had on the show that's actually talked about what you just said, like creating the story, but starting like big in terms of like the world and then coming in small to focus on the character, as opposed to other authors who have started with the character and then from the character they branch out into
Right.
the world, which both are really, really interesting. I myself fall in like the latter where I start with the character and go with the world. But in your opinion, let's actually talk about this for a little second. In your opinion, do you feel that starting with the world and sort of focusing on the character is a little bit easier, in your opinion, than starting with the character and then trying to build the world from their point of view?
Right. So I actually tried doing it your way at first. I would try to start with a character, but for me, it was so hard for me to see where they were going, and, that sort of thing. And it was easier for me to figure out what their goals were going to be when I had already created the world around them. And you know how important that is to
Right.
your character's goals. And so it was so much easier when I was like, you know what? I can actually visually see what their goals are and what's going to happen because I've created it. And so it took me about, I would say, 3 or 4 months of just world building. And then it took me 1 month of like outlining the story before I actually started writing the first draft.
Again, very much like you in that sense, but I kind of do a little bit of the opposite. I actually, this is like my curse. I can never stop. And I'm sure you definitely agree, Victoria. Like when we have an idea in our head, we just have to write it down. We don't know if we'll ever get to it. We don't know if we'll ever get to the story, but we just like to have it there so we can go back to it. I have two stories, which I probably may not get to for another few years. It's a historical Western, which I've never written a Western at all. It's titled Red Sun, and it follows a young American who was a soldier, or say the son of a soldier, who lived in Japan with his dad during the 1850s, 1860s era, who comes back to the United States to hunt down the people who were responsible for his dad's death, much like a Western. And he travels all over the world where he kind of comes back, does a full circle back to Japan in the late 1870s. And then, of course, I have a Viking fantasy story, which that's going to be something incredible. But I just wrote it down, just the characters, so I could just go back to them. And I haven't even started on the world yet. I just start with the characters, like, okay, I have to put them down there because if I don't, I'm going to forget and it's going to bug me forever. But just like authors, we always have stories we want to tell. We always want to say, oh, we want to do this, let's do this. And we love to create. And when we decide we want to share it with the world beyond our inner circle, that's where it comes to a different mindset, which we now go into what I like to call the business side of being an author. So, Victoria, just now you said that this is your sixth book that you have written, but the one that you feel is a little bit better than your previous ones.
Yes.
So, when you decided to make the decision to publish your story, did you want to go the route of independent publishing or even going back to your first book? Did you want to try your hand at traditional publishing?
That is so funny. This is going to be so funny because the reason why I ended up doing indie and self-publishing is because I fell in love with a illustrator and I really
Ooh.
wanted to be in charge of the cover myself. And I had like a certain person that I had in mind. Like I saw her artwork and I was like, she's the one. She has to be the one who designs my cover. Like it has to be her. And so I was like, you know what? And I know that working with a publisher, oftentimes you don't really get those choices.
Right.
And so I was like, oh, you know what? I think I'm just going to self publish because I know she's going to do an amazing job. And you know how important they say the cover is.
Yes.
So,
Absolutely, 100%. And as I always talk about on the show, whatever route you go, traditional or indie, it's an incredible opportunity for either side. But it's always important to know the benefits and the consequences. For traditional publishing, the benefit is you have a large audience, you're part of a wide vast of authors who are in the same genre as you. But like traditional publishing, it's a business and your book has to sell. And if your book doesn't sell, that's it. Your book's axed and you're gone from the pages. With self-publishing, you have more creative control. But with that, that means you're your own boss.
yep.
You have to do your own marketing, you have to find your own illustrator, your own cover artist, which could also be illustrator, your own editor, and also make flyers, digital flyers, or even print flyers for your ARC readers, beta readers, all that to get the word across. And then trying to figure out, okay, do I want to go with Amazon? Do I want to go with Barnes and Noble? Do I want to go with Kobo? All of that. That's all a lot of marketing and planning. And it's what one guest said on the show are the two brains of an author, the creative brain and the business brain. The creative brain's sole purpose is to create the book. The business brain is all about marketing. And when it comes to marketing, the audience is important. Whether you're writing for a vast audience to hit the big market, or you want to specifically focus on the narrow group of like hardcore fantasy, hardcore romance, science fiction, whatever. So, Victoria, for you, how would you say that the audience or the research aspect of the audience is important for not only the Sacred Vine, but also your previous books? And has your research of the audience changed with every book?
So, oh gosh, that's like yes and no. um, so, okay. So, before I actually started writing these like novels, I actually had two children's books that I wrote, and I worked with an editor, and they're actually like finished. I just have to have them illustrated, and you know that how much that costs, right?
Yes.
And so I've kind of like put them away, you know what I mean? Like save them for like a rainy day, like, so I will eventually get to them, but I realized really like deep within myself, I really wanted to publish like, like a series, like not
Mm.
just a children's book. Like I I grew up reading, Harry Potter, and I was saving this, but I'll go ahead and mention it.
All
A
right.
book a book that I a series that I read that I was like, wow, that really got me into reading was Inkheart by
Oh
Cornelia
my
Funke.
gosh. I remember that. That's a blast from the past. I never read the book,
Yes.
but I definitely saw the movie. May have been a little different from the book, but I
Oh yeah.
remember that. Man, that's a blast from the past. I haven't heard that name in a long time.
Yes. Inkheart. Like, so if I were to compare my books right now to another book, I would actually say, Inkheart was really a big driving force of I want to write a book like this. Yeah, so I just loved the world building in those books because I'm telling you, and that's another thing is that I love books where everyone can enjoy, other readers. And so I will say,
Right.
I love Fourth Wing. I love, the Akotar series. I love all of that. But I want to make something that everyone can read and that everyone can enjoy. So my book, it doesn't have any curse words. It has romance, but more closed door, so, and that was
Right.
something that I had to make. That was a hard decision, right? Because what's popular right now, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
smut, right?
Spicy romance.
Yeah, spicy romance is popular right now. But I really looked, I kind of had to do some self reflection and be like, one day my girls are probably going to read this book. And would I be comfortable with them reading it? And if the answer is no, then that, I wouldn't really be happy. And
Right.
so I decided, this is going to be young adult. I'm gonna make sure that. But I will say my book does have a couple trigger warnings in it because there is, that's another thing is that's in my book. That's a theme is like how to overcome grief and
Mm.
death is happens in my book. I know it's like you don't want to reveal too much, but you know what I mean? I want to warn readers. And there's like a little snippet in my book that, mentions infant loss.
Oh,
And so I'm gonna
okay.
put that in there and I'll put what page it is. And you don't actually have to read it if that would trigger you in some way. But
Right.
I felt that it was important to the story in the world building aspect. And it's not necessarily a specific person, it's just kind of mentioning like how the vine works,
Mm.
so that you know what I mean? And I didn't want to, just in case, I didn't want to trigger somebody in some way. So
Right.
I'll put that in there for sure. But there's definitely grief in my book.
Interesting. And that kind of leads into the next question, which I think you've already answered a little bit. So, for any author who wants to get into the genre that they're writing, it's always good to read the books that we want to get into. Like for fantasy, it could be like Harry Potter, or George R. R. Martin's Game of Thrones, C.S. Lewis' Chronicles of Narnia, or even Brian Jacques' Redwall. Or if you want to go science fiction, Dune, or whatever. And those books are typically used for research in the sense of like, okay, what do people like? What kind of characters do they like? What are the tropes? And not try to imitate or replicate, but definitely try to take your own spin on the classic characters and the classic themes. Now, you've already mentioned, of course, Harry Potter and the Fourth Wing and so forth. And going also now specifically into the young adults story, which I've had a lot of young adult authors on this channel. For you, Victoria, how do you sort of balance being a young adult author in terms of like the story? Because a lot of young adult authors I've had on the show have really kind of struggled where they don't want to dumb down their story for their readers or question their readers' intelligence, but they want to find a line between general fiction for adults, but it's not really kids. It's like that fine middle where it's mature, but it's not very, what's the word I'm thinking of? Very obscene or too graphic.
Right. And I think in order to do that, you have to think, like, go back to when you were that age, right? We all thought that we were adults. We all thought
Yes.
that, right. And so even at like the age of 14, 15 for myself, I thought I had a mature way of thinking. And when I look back, it's just like, oh my goodness, I mean, yes and no, right? And so I like to put myself in my own shoes from back in the day, and I would be like, how would I react in this situation?
Right.
But my characters in my book are actually turning 18, so it's a little bit easier for me to like put myself
Oh, okay.
right. And so I haven't explained this, but so a big pivotal point, how there's always that big, opening pivotal point where everything starts
Right.
changing in a book. So they're doing a ceremony, like a ritual. Remember I told you I'm like building culture?
Right.
And so the vine blooms only 4 times a year, and it's at the changing of each season. And so there's kind of like a huge ritual where everyone comes together. And so it's not like birthdays like me and you, like we have. It's where like several, like about a dozen elves have bloomed from the vine together, and they're kind of celebrated by everyone. Like,
Right.
and at the same time, other elves bloom at the same time. So it's like this whole, like, there's an entire changing of seasons that I'm gonna be talking about, which is really fun to kind of make magic and all that. And then there's, celebrating them and the vine. So the vine is what is that called? Like a sentient, do you know what I'm trying to say? Like sentient being where like it
Yes.
has cognitive abilities. The
Hmm.
vine does have that. And so the vine is actually like will bless each elf at their
Oh,
18th
okay.
birthday. And it's kind of them being accepted as an adult, like into the community. Kind of like how when we would graduate, right?
Right.
And so there's a whole backstory of, what's going to happen with them going from like being viewed as children to now you're being viewed as an adult. So kind of a coming of age a little bit there. And so there's that pivotal moment in my book where there's the ceremony. And
Mm.
so, it's just, it's going to be good. It's going to be good.
Nice. And that kind of leads into the next business question, which I'm going to reword a little bit.
Okay.
So, when you were crafting this story and with the business mindset in mind, did you write this story in the sense that you wish that you had this book growing up, reading and enjoying? Or did you write it for others who share the same interests as yours? And I ask this because a lot of us, when we start up as writing, we first off, we write for ourselves because we enjoy these stories. We want to tell these stories. But we also have to think, okay, would other people like these types of stories? And we also have to keep that in mind. So, for you, Victoria, when writing The Sacred Vine, where did you sort of see yourself, sort of writing for yourself or writing for a particular reader in mind?
That is such a hard question because when I started off writing, it was actually, I was trying to, and I think a lot of people can relate to this. When you start off trying to write with other people in mind, it almost can make it to where you can't write. You know what I
Right.
mean? You're trying to take in all these different people's opinions and ideas, and you're looking at videos of what would they like, what, you know what I mean? And so I had to come back to really why did I want to write? And ultimately it's actually for me, And I want to prove to myself that I can do this and that I want to put out the best story possible that I can. And I
Right.
would love for readers to enjoy it too. And I feel like we all have really similar experiences. And so me writing and writing from the heart and really kind of pulling from my own experiences, I feel like the readers can relate to that in my story. And so it's not as much for me like business. It's
Right.
more because I actually don't really have a huge plan or idea for business. It's more just I just want to put out the best book that I can because this has been a dream of mine since I was young, since I was going to the library. And,
Right.
I wanted to, I'm like, wow, I want to write a story and have other people read it and just enjoy it. And so that's kind of what my motivation is.
Very, very nice. And you actually touched on something that we're actually going to get to in a little bit. But before we go on to there is one thing that I do think is important to talk about, the business side, at least being an author, which is, of course, the trends, as I'd say, the trends war or the tropes war, and just writing to meet that market. And the reason why I'm bringing this up, listeners and viewers, is because for any first time author, the biggest thing that could harm a first time author is trying to write for the newest book that's out. And I say that because if a new book is out and it's like hitting a specific genre, everybody wants to cash in on that genre, on that market. And in this case, if I learned from a lot of authors on the channel, it's the romance and fantasy, which is literally the most read in any of the genres compared to historical fiction, science fiction, fantasy, thriller, etc. And why the point to understand this is that if you're going to try to write for a market, you're not writing for you. It's not your best work. And the most damaging thing is, even if you finish your story, that market's probably already gone and you're in the dust. And then again, that voice in the back of your head is saying you missed your chance. It's not going to come back. You just wasted 8 months of your life trying to write a book that's never going to hit that audience. So, Victoria, in your opinion, what are your thoughts on sort of writing for the tropes, writing for the trends in the publishing world? Because it can be detrimental to a first time author.
Right. So this is what I did. I wrote my story completely the way that I wanted to. And I was able to then go into my story and realize, oh, that's actually a trope. That, you know what I mean? And so I didn't
Right.
necessarily write to have those tropes in my book. I wrote my book and then kind of was like, oh, here are my tropes. This is how readers can relate to, and why they will want to read my book. And so I know a lot of tropes, like it's so funny. I feel like there's like a mixed bag of, views and thoughts on tropes. People
Yes.
either love them or hate them. And so I wish that we could kind of push past that and just look at the book for what it is.
Hmm.
Look at the story for what it is and what it contains. Not, and I actually love in stories, I love the bad guys. And I love, a lot of people, here's an example, Nesta, right? And Akotar. A lot of people don't like her. But what I love her flaws. I love the way that Sarah J. Maas wrote all these characters with flaws because that's relatable. Even though they're not likable, right? We all know
Right.
somebody that's like that person, right? And so it's relatable. And so I think that's why a lot of people love her books is because they're just so relatable in the sense that nobody's perfect, not even the main characters.
Right. And honestly, go back to what you said, writing for yourself, just want to put out the best story out there. That in turn goes back to what were your long term goals when you started this journey? Did you want to be an author or do you want to be known as an author? Because those are two very different mindsets with their own goals. which then leads into the last important question of the business side, especially going back to if you're trying to write for the trends, write for the markets, like my book's gonna be a part of this gravy train. It's going to be the start of everything. I had an author on the show a year ago, and her name was Natalie Wright, author of Season of the Dragon. And when I had her on the show, she explained to me that The Season of the Dragon was her seventh book. I was under the impression that it was her first. It wasn't. And then she dropped a pearl of wisdom that I've incorporated into my show, which I think is very important for any first time author or writer to really reflect on or even just talk about, which is there's no guarantee that your debut novel is going to be the start of your legacy. Now, I've already had a guest sort of break that claim. His name was Andy Peliquin. His debut novel skyrocketed him to award-winning status and allowed him to live off of this success to create three new series of books. But on the offside, you have authors that have rise, fall, rise again, fall even lower, and then that voice of imposter syndrome comes back, which then comes back to the main point, as I said earlier, which are what were your long-term goals when you started this journey? So for you, Victoria, in your own opinion, how important is it for first-time authors to really understand that their debut book is not going to be the start of their legacy, but it should not deter them from writing if telling stories and being an author, being a writer is indeed what they want to do. It is indeed their passion.
Okay, so what I want to say with everything that you just said, and what I would want a first time author to take away from anything would be that comparison kills creativity. It does.
Yes.
Comparison kills creativity. So, and the reason I'm saying that is because you have in your mind all of these long-term goals and all of this, this grand idea of, my book's going to be made into a movie, or just, this grand idea. And I think what we need to do as all of us, and what has worked for me so far, and my book's not even out yet, is we need to start small and then work out. We're trying to do national. We're trying to do, world grand, I want my book here and here and here. And instead, work right local, work right where you're at, work with the community that you're based in. And by doing that, I've gotten to know some really awesome bookstore owners, and I've met so many people in the community who I can learn from and that I'm able to take away from. And from there, that's where, eventually I think that for authors, your book will start to trickle out, and everyone's like, oh, you start with friends and family, but really look for the advice, look to the people who are in your community already, and see, you can kind of compare and be like, okay, what worked for them, what didn't? Because
Right.
we're in the same area, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you can kind of take away and you can learn from them. And actually, a lot of authors are actually really willing to share. They're really willing to work with you. And because, I think there's this whole stigma of authors, oh, we can't get advice from each other because we're competition, right? But
Right.
I don't agree with that. From experience, where you're a little scared, to talk to people, especially face to face. But I personally realized that it works so much better when you go face to face, when you meet people and you go out. But that being said, you have to be willing to do that. You have to put in the work. You have to show up to their signings, and show up to the events that they're at. It's not going to happen just by sitting behind your camera. It's not.
No.
So you have to show up.
Definitely, absolutely. And I love that what you said, comparison kills creativity. And it is true. I know a lot of us always are inspired by a lot of our authors, and we may take inspirations from their writing styles and how they approach characters. But going back to my very, very first season on the show, one guest said, which is very important, we don't want to ever be considered the next J.K. Rowling, the next C.S. Lewis, the next George R.R. Martin. It's nice that people would say that about us or make those comparisons themselves, but I would never say that I am anything like George R. R. Martin or C.S. Lewis or even Brian Jacques. There's no way I could ever imagine myself reaching that level of storytelling. Now, I could potentially get there a few years after I've gone through the fires and the flames and some obstacles, but that takes time, which I think every first time author should understand that everything takes time. Grit trumps talent, as one author said.
Right. Exactly.
Talent doesn't matter if you have like your best storytelling, you have the best prose. Grit will always trump it because if you're not willing to go through the same obstacles that every one of us is going through as an author, then you may want to reflect because grit becomes talent and you only get better as time goes on. And even going off of what Victoria said, if you want to get your book out there, again, start local. Go to your local library, see if they're having author days or little small conventions. Hey, I want to be a part of that to showcase your book. Or if you know a local bookstore in your area and you want to get your books in their store, talk to them about that. Start off small and then just go from there. Even televise like your book on social media, like do a live reading, like the first few pages or even a chapter to really get people's attention. To like saying, hey, this book's coming out soon. Here's a little teaser. Everything starts off small. Nothing is an overnight success, generally speaking. There are some exceptions to that rule, but mostly everything goes through steps. And if we acknowledge that, then we'll be fine. And that also comes back to community. The small community that we have as indie authors is incredible. I'm sure, Victoria, you would definitely agree that on Instagram, there's a lot of indie
Yes.
authors who are in the same boat as we are, trying to get their story across, trying to make connections. And it's from these connections that we ourselves grow. This person may know someone who's good in marketing. This person may know someone who's an illustrator. This person may know someone who's a voiceover artist who's looking for new books to showcase on their show. Everything. So all those connections really are helpful. And sometimes those connections become great friends. So for you, Victoria, on this journey of yours, who would you say have been your biggest supporters? And have you ever gotten a sense of validation from fellow indie authors who you've met on social media?
So absolutely yes. And I will say that I was very hesitant to make an Instagram at first for, my author's Instagram. I was, there's a whole stigma behind you're kind of being an influencer, right?
Right.
There was that. And I just, for a while I was like, I don't want to do it. And it's not because I didn't want to put in the work. It's more so, I guess I just had to get past the idea that I actually, this is how people talk nowadays. This is how you connect. This is how you make connections.
Right.
And so I have only been on Instagram with my account for like 4 months.
Really?
Yes, only 4 months. And I have made so many friends. I have met so many authors. I have gotten the best advice. I have learned so much from so many people. And I've actually met my editor on here. And right. And I had no idea that she was an editor. And and she's going to laugh when she's watching this. But, she's just like a fellow poet. And I was like talking to her, and she used to work in the publishing business. And she's like, hey, would you like for me to edit your book? Because, I used to do that. And I'm just like, oh, what? Yeah, of course. And so I think that's what's so awesome about this community is that we are actually able to all pull together and work
Yes.
together. And so we're all supporting each other. We're all supporting small businesses. And
Hmm.
I love that. And I love supporting other artists. And that's another thing, right? You don't think about how many different types of people that are actually needed in making a book, right? There's not only editors, I mean, it's not only publishers, there's just so many different like artists. And I'm just like, kind of mind blown, right?
Yes,
At first.
absolutely. It's crazy. And I 100% agree. I've met a lot of incredible authors on Instagram because I did not know there was a thing such as bookstagrammers on Instagram. And yes, viewers who are watching this for the first time, that is a term on the Instagram community. It's incredible. I've met a lot of authors, and a majority of my authors that I've showcased on this channel from, I want to say, from last year to now, well, actually more so of this year, but in particular, have all been pretty much from Instagram. And it's incredible. I've met so many great people, so many young authors really getting their name out there. Some first timers, some people who are working on their second book, some people working on their next series. It's incredible. And even people who work on the other side of the publishing world, book reviewers, book coaches, voiceover artists in the publishing world. It's incredible. And just like you, Victoria, I've met my editor on Instagram as well. Shout out to Lori Ball. She's probably the most fantastic editor in the business. She's a fellow author, and she also makes custom maps for
Oh,
all of my
wow.
books. Which, if you ever want to check her out, make sure to stay towards the end of the video. And now, with all of that said, we now arrive at the very end of this amazing interview, Victoria. So, with everything that we've talked about, with everything that you've experienced and gone through as an author, as a poet, as a writer, what is your word of wisdom to fellow authors out there who want to make the first leap, who want to take the first step into showcasing their work for the masses?
So the first bit of advice that I wish that I had been given was to, and this is going to sound so maybe not what other people would say,
Okay.
but I would say to actually, instead of reaching out to others, and I know you have to get this advice from me, but instead of reaching out to others, actually just go ahead and focus like internally and focus on what you want to write and just go ahead and do it. Quit asking, what if this, what if that, why this, quit asking all of yourself, like quit doubting yourself. Really, you're doubting
Hmm.
yourself. And if this is something that you really want to do, and it can't be for the money, it can't be for the fame, because those are never guaranteed. If this is
Right.
something that you really want, then you have to kind of, go for it and go ahead and write it. And yes, you can watch all the YouTube videos and all the how to's, all the include this in your book, don't include this.
Hmm.
You can watch all of those videos, but until you actually sit and actually try, and your first draft is going to be bad.
Yes.
It's going to be terrible. You're going to read it and be like, this, I can't publish this. Right. And that's how it is. That's how it is for all authors. If you ask any famous author, they're going to tell you, you can't read my first draft. You can't,
Right.
because you go through, and then you have to you have to have something, though. You can't work from a blank paper. You
Right.
you have to have something. And so I would say to go for it, and don't necessarily worry about the marketing part, because like I said, you can't, if you don't have anything to market, right? It's like, so you have to have something there to market. And you can, of course, start an Instagram or start some sort of social media of your process and your journey. And a lot of people love that. And they love to watch you go through your journey of doing that. But I will say that at least start, and there's going to be times of worry and doubt and imposter syndrome. There's going to be
Yes.
times that you feel like you can't write. And that's why you have an outline. That's why outline your book. A lot of people like to work from, what is that called? Pantsers? I think it's called
I,
pantsers.
yeah, I know the term you're talking about, where they don't
Yeah.
necessarily have an outline. They just write and the story just flows from there.
Right. But I'm telling you, anytime that I was in doubt to keep my story going, I would just, I'd go to my outline and I'd be like, this is what has to happen next. And so I'm just going to write it no matter how bad it is. I'm just going to keep going. And that's how I finished my first draft within like a 6-month period. Just by, yeah, just by pushing through and being like, there were days where I was just on it and I was feeling it, and you're, those writing days where you're like, wow, this is good. And then
Right.
there are going to be days when you're like, ooh, this is bad. But you just
Yes.
got to keep going and don't edit. Don't edit when you're writing. Just keep going. Just keep pushing forward. And that's really hard to do. I know. It
Yes.
is.
Absolutely. And that perfectly summarizes my old uh saying on this, which is write drunk, edit sober. Your story doesn't have to make sense. Like could be completely off the rails, but if you just get your idea down on paper and it's there, step away a few days, a week, and look at it sober. Look at it with fresh eyes because your mind will be relaxed. And then it's going to be painful to edit your first draft, but I can guarantee you the books that we love to read and share with others, I guarantee you those were not the same as their first drafts, which at the end, going back with everything that Victoria has said and that I have said, listeners and viewers, if you understand what you want to do as a writer, you will be fine. And now we have finished this incredible author interview. Thank you all for joining us today. And again, I want to give a huge thank you to our guest, Victoria, for coming on the show. Victoria, thank you so much for coming on the show and telling us all about your upcoming work. I am excited to see it when it comes out this December. Where can people find and engage with you to stay up to date with news of the Sacred Vine? And can people find your other works on other platforms?
So right now I've basically been working from my Instagram, but recently I've made a TikTok, I've made a YouTube channel. You know how it goes when you're first starting out. You only have like a couple of subscribers, but you know what?
Right.
It's okay. It's okay. So I respond the most from my Instagram, and it's just my name. It's like Victoria M. Sorenson. I was just like, you know what? I'm just gonna make it my name because that's what I read online what to do. Just make it your name so make it easy for people to find you. And so, yeah, I will be posting. I already have several different things lined up for like the next coming months of kind of like I have a character art that's going to be released, which
Ooh.
super excited for. I'm super excited for this because it's not just a character art. It kind of, you're going to look at it and it kind of has like, I'm trying not to give it away. It has like something going on in the picture and it'll make you interested. You'll be like, what's going on? You know what I mean? And so I have that character art and then I have like, I'm doing like a big giveaway more
Ooh,
towards
nice.
like September, October, and I'm working with a couple of different businesses and we're all kind of like coming together to be a part of like this like signed giveaway. And so I'm super excited for that too.
Awesome. Well, I'll link all those down below in the description of this video. And I urge all of my subscribers and followers on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube to go to Victoria's channels and to give her a shout and to support a fellow author. And be also on the lookout for more details of my third book coming out. It's still in the process, still in the final rounds, but if you've been following my posts, then It should get you excited. And those maps that I mentioned before with my third book, those are made by Lori Ball. So make sure to go give her a follow on Instagram, as well as the Ivory Quill on Instagram. And until then, viewers and listeners, thank you all for joining us for another wonderful, incredible, amazing author interview. And happy Memorial Day for everybody. Again, Victoria, thank you so much for coming on the show. And I wish you the best of luck with the Sacred Vine. And who knows, I may have you back on the show again for the sequel in your upcoming trilogy. I cannot wait for that.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed my time on here and talking with you and getting to. This is my first interview, so my first time really getting to talk about my book. So thank you for having me.
You're welcome, Victoria. And thank you all, listeners, very much for joining me all throughout May. I have two more interviews coming up this week. You don't have to wait and see. And until then, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out, asking you to like, subscribe, comment down below. And until next time, have a wonderful day.